That's right, I'm doing another underrated Russian game. What can I say, there's a lot of games that fall into that category. Also, I'm just really excited for Stalker 2. I say underrated because Metro Exodus had one of the most botched launches I've seen in a while. Not because it was some sort of buggy mess or any of the usual reasons that you would expect, but rather because it was launched as an Epic Game Store exclusive. This was of course announced only 2 weeks before the game was set to release and after most pre-orders had already been made. I don't normally pre-order games, so if you were one of the lucky ones who pre-ordered on Steam, you got to keep your copy on that platform. But what actually kind of blows me away is, for any physical pre-orders of the game, they switched out all the Steam keys and replaced them with Epic keys instead. I really feel bad for the poor bastards who had to go through and change all those out by hand. Naturally, this made people angry. I wasn't a fan of all the review bombing that happened to the previous Metro games. I don't think that's really directing the anger at the right people. But I also think the publishers should have realized that this kind of move in the 11th hour before release was obviously going to make people pissed off. Like many bad decisions, it came from the people who just wanted to make the most amount of money off the game, not from the people who actually made the game. Our decision to partner with Epic Games was based on the goal of investing in the future of the series and our development partner at 4A Games. We have every intention of continuing this franchise. The game sold okay on Epic, and after a year of exclusivity, it was released on Steam as well. But I think the most unfortunate thing about it was, because of all this, not as many people ended up playing the game. Which is a shame, because game's a good time. It fell short in some areas, but overall it's something I wish got more attention for what it did right than what it did wrong. The first thing I'll say is, you don't need to have played the previous Metro games to pick this up. That's because of a few reasons, primarily because this is by far the most different game in the series. It's called Metro Exodus not only because you're going to be venturing beyond the underground of Moscow, but because this game tries to bring a lot of new ideas to the Metro franchise. The heart of the game is still the same, with returning characters and gameplay elements, so fans of the previous ones definitely won't be lost when they pick it up. Life in Russia outside of Moscow is doing about as well as you would expect in the Metro universe, and although people have been scattered and isolated since nuclear fallout, the underlying cultural identity of the Russian people has stayed intact, with the universal love for both the AK and 80s aerobics. Metro Exodus doesn't follow the same formula that most other modern-day single-player games would. It doesn't have this huge open world to explore with a million branching storylines and side quests. It offers a pretty linear experience. Yeah, there's some choices you can make along the way, and it's definitely not as on-rails as the previous Metro games. But on the surface, this type of single-player game might seem outdated when compared to other recent single-player games. Strictly linear games certainly still exist, but for a first-person shooter, it's a bit more rare now. I love a good open-world RPG as much as the next guy, but is it really necessary for every single-player game to follow the same formula? I mean, cool, you've built a map that's 3 times the size of the last game you made. Too bad 90% of it is useless and boring. Metro Exodus is broken out into a semi-open world structure, which honestly I really enjoyed. The areas are small, but the benefit of that is that every corner of the map feels important. Nothing feels like filler, it makes you want to explore every inch. Each area has optional sort of side quests to do, and the rewards for taking the time to explore will usually leave you better off. These areas are divided up by seasons, and moving on to the next environment keeps the game feeling really fresh. I favor some more than others, but in general there's something unique about each area, and that made me really excited to keep playing. They all have something different gameplay-wise, so they're not only visually different, but all aspects of them are distinct. So what the devs and designers have done is traded scale for detail. A more linear experience may not sound appealing to some people, but let's not forget the advantage of smaller, more linear environments. They allow the designers to spend more time on the small things and just bring the game to the next level visually. The word I want to use to describe the whole experience is immersion, but that's kind of a nothing word that gets thrown around a lot by lazy people who just want to use buzzwords to describe a game. You know, people like me. So let me try to explain what I mean. In Metro, you have the usual gameplay systems that come with any single-player game. You've got a map, a quest log, an inventory, a workbench, and so on. But these are real items in the world that you need to interact with. It doesn't bring you to a separate menu that's so garbage and confusing that you need to download a mod to fix it later. It keeps the player in the game. In Metro, your backpack is your inventory, and you need to physically bring that out once you want to access it. Of course, it still has a HUD to actually interact with it, but it feels like you're still in the world, not just in your inventory screen. The map is probably the best example of this. It's something that you carry around in your back pocket, and more importantly, it looks like something you found at a local gas station and started marking up with a Sharpie. Which, feels appropriate. They're just broad markers over an area of interest, so it encourages you to put down the map and just explore for yourself. It also doesn't stop the world around you just because you got lost. So if you're carelessly checking it without paying attention to your surroundings, then you have nobody to blame but yourself. The other systems and tools that you use all have this tactile sort of feel to them that is very satisfying. There's visual and audio cues that tell you when you need to fix something with your gear, and because of that responsive feedback, it made me feel immersed in the world. There aren't that many things like separate menus and cinematic cutscenes that take me out of the experience. Not that many. But we'll come back to that. Metro was able to draw me into the world in a way that I haven't experienced in a while, and to me that's this game's biggest strength. That's not to say there aren't other highlights here either. I've always felt that the gameplay and combat in previous Metro games was solid, but nothing really to write home about. So I'm really happy that the combat in Metro Exodus is a significant step up from the previous titles. There's a much larger focus on stealth rather than going in guns blazing, so it's not as if every encounter will warrant you to use them, but the weapons don't feel stiff at all. It did feel at first like the weapon variety was a little bit scarce, with only a handful to choose from in the entire game, but the customization makes up for it entirely for me. There's so much detail and creativity in how you can alter your guns at a workbench. Each weapon generally has a role it would fit best into, but since there's so much to tweak, you can make any of them work for a given situation. There's no stopping you from having a short-range sniper and a long-range silenced pistol. Each weapon and mod typically has a trade-off where you increase one stat at the expense of another, though the mods themselves aren't trying to be super realistic. So the game lets you make something fun, even if it is a bit impractical. Like any good stealth game, the ammo can be scarce. That's a good thing though, because when you value the resources you have, you tend to think about the best way to approach a situation. You really don't want to fail an objective just because you didn't have the bullets to do it. The difficulty settings for the game do alter the amount of resources you'll pick up, and that's one of the many reasons why I think you should play on hardcore. I enjoyed this game largely because combat was a challenge. I think if it was any easier, I probably would have gotten bored halfway through and stopped playing. I really don't think the story is well written enough on its own to keep you playing, but we'll come back to that. Plus, you can change the difficulty at any time during your playthrough, so no harm in trying it this way and turning it down later. If you're even more sadistic, you can try Ranger Hardcore, though I've never dared to try it. I think Hardcore is probably my max for now. Mostly because I'm incompetent. One thing that Metro Exodus does carry over from the previous games is there are good and bad endings. If you want to get the good ending, you basically need to play a morally good Artyom. Artyom's the name of the main character, I don't know if I explained that yet. Always use stealth when fighting against humans. You should do non-lethal takedowns unless you're forced into some sort of firefight. You should lower your weapon and help people when they're not trying to kill you.
Oh, Mama, it's him! The man from the train! He's here to save us!
And just generally treat people well.
You won't shoot. Well, if you're not going to shoot, then it's true that some intruders are kinda okay.
Check in with your crew regularly and help them out with any tasks they give you, and you'll be fine. If you're not a big fan of stealth, then I'm not sure this is the right game for you. It's not all stealth, though. The mutants are a fun change of pace, because most of the time, you'll need to shoot your way through them. Though, to be honest, I think they fall short in a few areas. A lot of the mutant interactions will come down at quick-time events, which I don't hate all the time, but they're definitely more frequent than I would like in Exodus. Oh, I guess I died. There's a large variety of mutants though, which is great. It's part of what makes it so exciting to venture into a new area. You never know what you're going to come across next, and whether or not something is going to try and chew your face off. We cool? Yeah, we're cool. Mutants can be easy to take in small groups, but if there's too many of them, you're probably just better off running. Each area will introduce new mutants and also new factions of humans. I was a big fan of the factions in previous Metro games, and I definitely wasn't disappointed with the factions in Exodus. I just think some of them are stronger than others. Particularly the factions in the first half of the game felt very strong, but later on, there are some that just fell a bit flat for me. Which isn't a total surprise. The series took a big leap in terms of its scope with Exodus. We end up seeing much more of Russia than in all the previous games combined. So I did have some instances where things didn't entirely feel like the Metro universe to me. And when I finished the game, it felt like there were certain areas that stood out as more memorable. That's not to say that some areas weren't worth including. They all add something to the experience. I'm being purposefully vague because I don't want to spoil the backstory of these factions and how you progress with them. I think regardless of if you've played a Metro game before, there's going to be an area and a faction that you really enjoy.
I kill you now!
I've talked a lot about the aspects of this game that work really well. The combat, the visuals, the immersion. Where I think Exodus misses the mark is in its story. This game pushed the series to the limit with its other features. So I'm a bit surprised that they didn't follow through with that philosophy when it came to the story. Characters will try to communicate with you, ask you questions, even open up to you emotionally, and there's nothing the player can do to interact. Not only are there no dialogue options to choose from, but Artyom is also a completely silent protagonist. So the player can't choose how to react to a given situation, but you're also not able to learn more about the character you're playing as through these conversations. So you just sit around having people talk at you. It feels like something you would expect from a game 6 or 7 years ago.
Oh my god. It's you she's been screaming about. Alive! You came for her. All right. I'll help. Finally, I'll be of some use.
It feels unengaging and makes sitting through some of the longer dialogue scenes really stale. The writing isn't horrible, but I was honestly a little let down by the end. It started to feel a bit rushed towards the finale, and I wasn't left feeling extremely satisfied with how it all played out. Looking back, I think the parts of the game I enjoyed the most were the first half of my playthrough rather than the second half. It also doesn't help that there's some technical issues like how characters will talk over each other constantly for some odd reason.
Artyom, how are you, friend? I see you're all right. This calls for a celebration.
A few more scars and you will be completely irresistible to any woman. Speaking of which, you're your usual suspect.
So with all that in mind, I ended up doing something I don't normally do with these types of games. I switched the language over to Russian and just threw on subtitles. It eliminated a lot of the problems I had with the delivery of dialogue and also added to the immersion for me.
Все не успокоишься никак. Уперся как баран. Сколько я тебе уже говорил. О себе не думаешь, это ладно. Твое дело. Хоть убейся из-за фантазий своих. Но ты о ней думал. Она же тебя, дурака, любит.
Папа, не надо.
Ты из Ордена ушел ради этого. И я тебя тогда понял, хотя после D6 людей жуть как не хватает.
Okay, I kind of hate that my whole argument is boiling down to subs, not dubs, but, you know, give it a shot if you wish. The writing issues I had by no means ruined my experience. I think the enjoyable parts about Exodus far outweigh the negative parts. It's not a perfect game, and it certainly didn't have a perfect launch, but I think it's a shame it didn't really get the attention it deserved. Single-player experiences like this seem to be getting made less and less, which I feel is a bit of a shame. It's a good game for someone who wants another post-apocalyptic world to explore. Even more than that, it's the perfect game for someone who wants to 100% it and see everything it has to offer. There's a lot of great moments you'll have exploring the areas off the beaten path. Just pay attention to your surroundings.